Welcome back to Old School Sports and our OOTP 23 playthrough of the Kansas City Royals. We are heading towards spring training and preparations for the 2030 season. So far, the big decisions in the offseason for the Royals were moving on from and declining the option on our longtime star pitcher Trevor Rogers, trading away our longtime closer Austin Roberts, who had done a fantastic job for us over the years, but was heading into his final year of arbitration and was going to be very expensive. And then recently in free agency, we signed the veteran infielder Tim Anderson, who very well could become our starting shortstop for the upcoming season. At the very least, probably will play a pretty prominent role somewhere in the infield and even potentially as a backup center fielder for us. So spent about $10 million a year on him. We can see we don't have a ton of money available for free agents at this point, especially if we do bump our scouting and development budgets back up towards the levels that they were last season. So probably not going to be a ton of activity over the next few weeks until spring training gets started, but who knows? On the margin, maybe there's going to be a cheap pitcher somewhere or a cheap bat that we'll find as we get closer to spring training. And with the Royals still in win now mode, obviously going to do everything we can to bring some more talent onto the team, whether it's before the season gets started or as we head closer to the trade deadline once the 2030 season is underway. It's now February 18th, and we're getting close to the start of spring training. We've thrown out a bunch of minor league offers to some younger players and then some players who could absolutely compete at the major league level. Most notably, some of the top position players available: Carter Binns, Alec Bohm, former Royal Alec Bohm, actually. But Tim Anderson is the only major league free agent signing we've made thus far this offseason, and probably will end up that way. We have upped our scouting and development budgets a little bit, although we're lower than we were a year ago. That's going to leave us going into the season with about $2.5 million for free agents, so it gives us a little bit of capacity to potentially take on some contracts as we get closer to the trade deadline. If injuries kind of open up a weakness on our team, or we just find out that someone's not performing as well as expected, hopefully we can add a little talent as we get further into the 2030 season. And we've made it to the start of spring training. We are going to try to train Tim Anderson up a bit in center field. He could theoretically end up as our second best defensive center fielder behind only Luis Jose, who is fragile, coming off a year where he played only 70 games for us. So hopefully Anderson will be more somebody who we play out there occasionally. But in the event that Jason Dominguez doesn't end up making the 26-man roster, which is certainly possible, it's conceivable that Anderson would be our second best defensive option in center field, in addition to possibly being our starting shortstop. So we're going to see if we can get him a little more proficient at playing out there defensively over the next few weeks of spring training. And after we signed Tim Anderson, it was just a matter of time till Nicky Lopez signed with somebody else. He ended up going to the Minnesota Twins, not making a ton of money, $3.6 million, but a longtime Kansas City shortstop is gone. And it definitely did have a bit of an impact as it cut fan interest 4 points from 92 to 88. He was a fan favorite, so not a shocker there, but still going into the regular season with fan interest in the high 80s, I think, is a pretty positive thing for the Royals. And the potential back end of our pitching staff is under a little bit of pressure here in spring training. Jack Wiesenberger, who we signed in spring training last year, had a real nice year for us with a 1.83 ERA over 44 and a third innings pitched. Been out with a strained shoulder for about the last week and a half now. And then Bruce Zimmerman, who we picked up in the Rule 5 draft, out with a partially torn labrum for about 4 months. So he is going to miss most of the season. I guess positively we'll be able to put him on a rehab assignment when he's back and healthy. But both of those players were potentially going to be at the back end of our pitching staff, as I mentioned, and with the losses of Roberts and Rogers this offseason, definitely those kind of 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th spots on our pitching staff are in play for a lot of different players right now, and I think a potential weakness for this team compared to what we've had going on at the back end of the pitching staff the last few years. So we may need to make some moves as we move into the season if our pitching isn't as big a strength as it has been in the past. And the Royals have made it to the end of spring training here on Monday the 25th. You can see had a really good spring with a 19-6 record. Do have those injury issues that we mentioned in the pitching staff a little while back. Unfortunately, Bruce Zimmerman out with that partially torn labrum for 3 months, and now Mackenzie Gore is on the IL with a sore elbow. We did just get Wiesenberger back, and you can see he's pitched 19 and 16 pitches on back-to-back days, so he is certainly in the mix for a spot in our pitching staff. And then Spencer Bauer was also banged up a bit. He did pitch 54 pitches in our last game of spring training yesterday, so hopefully that will help him get ready for the regular season. But going to be interesting to see what the 26-man roster looks like when we make those final cuts. And with the injuries to Bruce Zimmerman and Mackenzie Gore, actually was not that hard to come up with the 13 pitchers who will be heading to Kansas City at the end of spring training. Spencer Bauer, certainly our ace at this point, possibly in his final season with the Royals. Let's see, just check in what his contract demands are, and even worse than they were before. He's looking for over $30 million a year for 7 years. So for a player who will be 30 years old next year and is already fragile, not going to make that type of commitment to him right now. See how the year goes. He'll be followed by Caleb Lagerwell, Gordon Graceffo, who we picked up in the big trade for Austin Roberts during the offseason. Zach Jacobs and Tyler Bosma will be our fifth starter. Lefties out of the bullpen, once again, Aaron Ashby and Will Bryan, along with Will Goebel. And then Bryce Hubbard, who spent a lot of last season going back and forth between Omaha and KC, will break camp as one of 4 lefties out of the bullpen. Also, we'll have 4 righties out of the bullpen. R.J. Dabovich, ever reliable. Brian Matoyer, Rule 5 acquisition, who was helped by those injuries to make the squad. Jack Wiesenberger, and Ricky Vanasco, who had started a decent amount for us over the last few years. You can see 31 starts in 27 when we won it all, 15 starts in 28, and then 28 starts last year. Is going to be moving into the role of our closer to make up, hopefully, for the loss of Austin Roberts. Has excellent stuff and excellent movement. Not the best control, so hopefully he doesn't give up a ton of walks in critical situations, but we will see how Ricky Vanasco does in replacing Austin Roberts as a closer for these Kansas City Royals. And getting to the 13 players, the position players that we were going to keep on the roster was a much more difficult decision. We did go with Fernando Caldera as our backup catcher to MJ Melendez. He could be short for that position. He's a little bit above average defensively. Doesn't look like he's going to hit a ton at the major league level. And we do at this point have both Dylan Dingler, the veteran, and then the young prospect Angelo Bolden, who was our number 1 pick a few years ago. Will be getting his first AAA action this year. Certainly looks like he is going to have a better bat than Caldera and pretty similar defensively. So one or both of those players could see action on the 26-man roster in the not so distant future if we're not happy with what Caldera is doing, but figured he's kind of been our plan to become the backup at catcher for the last few years when we finally did move on from Reese McGuire as our backup. So we'll give him the first shot to back up Melendez coming out of spring training. We have also sent a number of pretty prominent players down. We signed a bunch of good players to minor league contracts. We've already sent Jason Dominguez down to AAA. Nick Gordon, who we signed to a minor league deal, sent him down to AAA. And we still have one cut left to make, and it's going to come down to Ricardo Cabrera, who has been our starting second baseman or a starting infielder most of the last few seasons since he first came up. Did not hit much last year. He is a nice, versatile defensive player, but he does still have an option year left, and with the fact that we have brought on Jordan Groshans to be a backup utility infielder, he's not quite as good defensively, but has a bit more of a bat. And then the fact that we brought Tim Anderson on board to play shortstop for us could leave Cabrera in a bit of a pinch as far as a roster spot. The other option to send down would be Fabricio Valera, who we picked up in a trade with Milwaukee last year. He was an all-star for them last season. Does not really necessarily profile offensively as an all-star type player. He does have really good home run power, and he hit 34 homers while batting .261 last year for the Brewers. So he has put up a 112 OPS plus and a 110 WRC plus over the course of his career. He still has 2 option years left also. I think we're going to keep Valera up just because I think he's got a potentially more interesting bat than Cabrera. So we are going to send Cabrera down to AAA for the time being, which I am sure will not be thrilled with, but that gets us to a 13-man roster, or 13 men on our 26-man roster who play the positions, 13 pitchers on the 26-man roster also, and I feel like we've got some pretty good players in AAA if and when we need some help. And looking at the potential lineups with those 13 players from our manager, Byron Nichols, Sal Frelick going to be leading off in playing left field against righties. Center fielder Luis Jose bats second. Bobby Witt Jr. ends up at third with the addition of Tim Anderson batting third. Junior Marin hitting cleanup and playing right field against right-handers. Alex Vasquez, the youngster, going to be our starting DH, batting number 5, his first full year at the major league level. Tim Anderson, shortstop, batting 6th. Peyton Williams going to be at first. Shi-Tong Kim will take over at second base and bat 8th. And then catcher MJ Melendez is going to be batting 9th. A few changes against lefties. Frelick still in the leadoff position, but Josh Young is going to take over for Alex Vasquez at DH and bat second. Tim Anderson will move up to bat third against lefties. Bobby Witt Jr. cleanup against lefties. And Alex Vasquez is going to move from DH to first base, still in the 5-hole against lefties. Shi-Tong Kim moves up to bat 6th. MJ Melendez moves up to bat 7th. Luis Jose back to the 8th spot in the order from the 2 spot in the order against left-handed pitching. And then Junior Marin batting 9th, still playing right field, though, against left-handed pitchers. So we will see how that roster and that rotation and that bullpen do when we kick off the 2030 season shortly. Before we do that, let's take a look at some preseason predictions here and see what the Royals are expected to do, at least through one simulation of the season. And it looks like it's going to be a battle for us to make the playoffs, projected to go 85-77, which would be a game worse in the win loss record than we were last year. You may remember we were 6 games out of the playoffs, or 6 games out of the division, and 3 games out of the wild card last season following that late season collapse when we lost 7 games in a row. So projection has the White Sox, the Royals, and the Tigers all within a game of each other in the AL Central, and also kind of right in the mix for one of those wild card spots. So going to be an interesting season. Bobby Witt Jr., at least in this sim, 23 homers, 87 driven in, 43 steals with a 286 batting average. Seems like a type of season that's a vintage Bobby Witt Jr. season that we would certainly take. Keep in mind with Bobby Witt Jr., could be his last year with the Royals. He's got a player option for $27 million next year in his age 30 season. So we are going to do everything possible to try to ensure that we can get back to the playoffs and get the most out of Bobby Witt Jr. this year. And speaking of players that we want to get the most out of, Spencer Bauer, as we talked about earlier in this episode, is also going to be heading for potential free agency. He was projected to go with 13-8. Pitch 166 innings with 212 strikeouts in this sim. He has been very durable for a fragile pitcher the last 3 seasons, going 34, 34, and 33 starts. Would love to get another full season out of him. As I mentioned, he is finally heading to free agency. Check in with him, and still looking for 7 years, over $30 million a year average for an extension. So this is most likely going to be the 2030 season, the final run for a lot of these guys together with the Royals. Looking at our financial situation, we've got just a little bit of money for free agents right now. Going to open up a lot of money for extensions next off season. But looking at the salary situation, as we've talked about, Bauer, free agent, Witt Jr., player option, MJ Melendez, team option, Peyton Williams and Tim Anderson both heading into free agency, and then Gordon Graceffo, Aaron Ashby, and R.J. Dabovich, and Mackenzie Gore and Josh Young. A lot of players, in their final years, most likely with Kansas City. So it's going to be a very different looking team next season. Hopefully, though, we will make it to the playoffs here in the 2030 season, and we are going to kick off that quest for the 2030 playoffs in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.